A lot of them are like a filing cabinet of links. It's like, here's the financial aid link, the housing link, the FERPA link, the family weekend link, but they don't acknowledge why that parent actually might be there. The parents aren't landing on those pages as just like neutral information consumers. They are typically arriving with a purpose and a feeling. And so you have to be able to be willing to say, okay, we need to think about that and get them to the place that they maybe need to go, but we don't need a link farm. That might feel comprehensive. Like, here, look at all this information I'm giving to you. But to a family, especially someone who's anxious or in a first generation family who's unfamiliar with higher ed, it can feel like being handed a map and no like dot on it where you are.
Hey, welcome to the Higher Ed Storytelling University podcast, a show where we bring together Marcom leaders from both inside and outside higher ed to give you fresh perspectives on successful content creation and strategy in higher education. My name is John Azzoni. I'm the founder of Unveiled, a video production company working specifically with colleges and universities. Learn more about our work, including our subscription approach to storytelling at unveiled.tv. That's UNVEILD. And if you like this podcast, then you'll love the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. It's my free weekly newsletter where we cover a lot of ground about content creation and strategy. Sign up at unveiled.tv/newsletter. All right, let's get on with the show. Hey, if your college has a parent page that's basically just a pile of links with a "we care about families" header slapped on the top, then we're going to need to work on that, sis. Or hang on, let me segment this intro. We're going to need to work on that, broski. Because as my guest Laura Rudolph will tell you, segmentation is one of the things that you should be paying attention to because not all parents are the same. And Laura is the founder of Square One Consulting, where she helps colleges communicate more clearly and, as she puts it, speak more human. Laura has spent the last decade obsessing over one of the most overlooked audiences in higher ed marketing, parents and families. And as we'll get into, the bar is pretty low across institutions when it comes to addressing this demographic. In this episode, Laura breaks down why most parent pages are informationally present but emotionally absent, what it actually looks like to build a page that earns trust instead of just listing links, and the 3 pieces of content she'd prioritize if she were overhauling a parent page from scratch. We also walk through some real examples of what good looks like, including some screen flows. So if you're just listening, maybe go watch the YouTube video for that section so you can see what the difference looks like in practice. And we've got a little launch happening today. Laura just released a free AI-powered parent communication assessment tool where you can drop in a URL or paste an email and get an honest read on whether your content is actually working for a parent audience. We'll talk about how that works and where you can find it. So this is a practical one. Let's go. Okay, Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So super great to have you on. I've been wanting to do an episode about parents for a while now. And it's a demographic that I think a lot of people know is important and feel in their soul is important, but really don't have a workflow to address. And so we're glad to get you on and talk about that. Before we start, what's something higher ed related or not that you've been kind of nerding out about lately?
Okay, mine is kind of non-related to higher ed.
Perfect.
So I've been feeling really nostalgic lately. I think it's partially because just a couple months ago, I turned a really big number.
20.
I would appreciate if someone thought that I was turning 20. I turned 40 2 months ago. And I have a toddler, not a toddler anymore. She's a preschool graduate. And so she's 5. She's, out for the summer. She's getting ready to go to kindergarten. And she's at this age where she's really starting to get into music and singing and learning lyrics to things and having preferences. And there was just something in me that I was like, I need to introduce her to the music of my childhood,
Yes.
like from the mid 90s to I'd say like early 2000s. And so I've been working on creating these playlists for her for when we're together in the car in different places. And I've been nerding out about it so much because I'm also, seeing and hearing this music for the first time in 10, 15 years. I haven't listened to a lot of this. During the academic year, I'm so focused on higher ed and I'm listening to higher ed podcasts and I'm listening to that. I don't take a lot of time to listen to music for my own enjoyment. And I have had so much enjoyment out of introducing her to songs. We've got to find clean songs, for considering it's a 5-year-old. But I think it's been such a joy to just introduce her to, some music that is such a good memory, spawned such good memories for me when I was, 14, 15, 16, driving around in the car with the windows down in the middle of the summer before the school starts. And so that's been what I've kind of been nerding out about lately.
What was your go-to genre in your teens?
So I'm from Kentucky. People would think country. I am not a country music fan, which is, I don't know, maybe it's the antithesis of being a Kentuckian. I was really into pop music. So, the first song I introduced her to, because I was like, I need something clean and something very, poppy that she'll like. I introduced her to Hanson, which
Perfect.
was like, I was like, she loved. So like score one for mom with that. But then I also made like a nostalgic playlist for me because I was enjoying it so much. I was actually cooking dinner the other night at my parents' house and I was there alone and my mom walked in and I'm like playing Usher while I'm cooking in the middle of the kitchen. And she was like, what is happening? But it's very kind of like a mix of things from just that era, and it's a lot of boy bands, some early Britney, but then there's like some emo music from that time that was also really good. And it's just been such a joy to reminisce in that way with her.
That's great. My kids love NSYNC. They love Britney Spears.
Yes.
So my daughter's 11. My other daughter is 8, almost 9. So all of the 90s stuff they're super into.
Good. So good. And like now it's considered, like classic music, right? Like
oldies.
It's like the oldies, which is really weird because I think my mind is still set in 2000. So I think like the 80s was 20 years ago. Like that, that's my mindset.
Yeah.
Not so much. I wish that was the case.
Well, cool. I love it. I can't remember where I saw this, but someone was like, or maybe it was like an Instagram reel where they were like, it's 7:00 on the dot. Where's Usher?
Oh gosh, that takes me back.
We'll leave that open-ended for people to fill in the answer.
I mean, everybody should know where Usher is at 7:00 on the dot.
Now that you've had a second to think about it. He's in his drop top and also cruising the streets.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, speaking of parenting, bring us up to speed on your relationship to the parenting demographic within higher ed and why that's a demographic that you're passionate about reaching.
Yeah. My first love was really journalism and storytelling. That's what I majored in when I was in college. But not just, the soft, frilly storytelling, the feature stories. I was actually interested in investigative journalism. I covered a lot of news. I was always given the crime beats. I was really kind of drawn to the idea that writing can really reveal something true. And I fell into higher ed and marketing by happenstance, as a lot of us do. But I did have that little bit of me as a journalist that was like, okay, can I really go to the dark side and do this? Because journalism's about uncovering the truth. Marketing, it's kind of dressing some stuff up, making some things sound better than maybe they are. But what I have, learned throughout my career is some of the best marketing is the marketing that tells the truth. It's not making something sound better. It's figuring out what is real, what matters, and what do people need to understand and how can I say it clearly? And that's, I think, why parent communication became so interesting to me, particularly when we saw a generational change in the parents to Gen X. I think that's when I started to see a change in the way I needed to write to resonate with them in a better way. When I was first in enrollment many moons ago, I remember coming out, being onboarded as a new person into enrollment and saying, hey, do we communicate with parents? And they were like, very intentionally, no, we do not do that. And I want to be fair to the time period because I think that at that time, the idea is, the student should lead the college search. And I think that's still true today. We ideally want the student to lead the college search. But the concern is that if we communicate too directly with parents, then we might undermine that student autonomy and that independence. And, that kind of stayed with me over time. And so later when I had the opportunity to write myself and make those decisions in a director role, I realized how much I loved writing for that audience. And it became honestly kind of a breath of fresh air, especially as a former journalist, because they were, skeptical in the best of ways. They really wanted
Mm-hmm.
transparency. They wanted honesty. They always look for the fine print in things. They didn't want this package of fancy marketing. They didn't want to hear about your Tempur-Pedic beds and your rock walls, right? Like they want to know what is real and what are you providing to my student. And that just really connected with me to how I had been trained as a journalist. And so writing for parents, especially that Gen X, really brought that instinct back into me. And it gave me kind of a permission to write more honestly. And I think that's where my passion really came from. And, I'm a millennial parent now myself, so I feel it more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the parent of a college bound student yet by any means,
Yeah.
but, I still understand that emotional posture of really wanting clear answers and wanting to know that someone respects that you're not just being nosy, like you're just trying to be a good parent and make a good decision for somebody that you love. And I think that that's why I really enjoy the parent communication now today.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I resonate that with like the safety of, or just being concerned about the well-being of your child, not just like the cool stuff that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very, as a parent, I'm very like pro let them fail,
Right.
and I think that works to an extent. I think that you also have to be pro like coaching them to not fail too hard. Like I feel like
Right.
college is such a big thing. This is an opportunity to know what's going on as a parent and coach them to be like, hey, this is happening. Did you get this
Right.
email?
I mean,
Why didn't
haven't
you
we
get this email?
succeeded as parents if we create human beings that are capable of living life, right? And I think that we don't give parents enough credit in that regard. And don't get me wrong, are there those parents out there that want to do everything for their student and write the essays, and when they're on tour, they're like, we are going to college, right?
We
Have I had a parent ask if they could come live in the student's dorm room for the first 6 weeks of the school year? Yes, I have. But
Wow.
I think, right. I mean, and those things do happen, and there are those people. But I think that if we talk about it from, a 10,000-foot approach, there's a lot of, emotional connection, and there's worry and anxiety. And frankly, if you look at the world that we grew up in as parents, we have gone through a lot of unique world experiences that former parents and generations never went through. And I think taking a step back to thinking about these are just human beings. They've had some really interesting experiences in their lives that have caused them to have more anxiety and be more concerned about safety. I remember in middle school was when we had the Columbine shooting for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then, later on we have 9/11 in high school. And it's just like it gets compounded by all of these experiences. We're parenting during a global pandemic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of another generation that's probably had as many, really impactful experiences on a world scale than what we have. And I think by nature, that just makes us more concerned as parents to make sure that our students and our children are going to be okay. And really, I came from a generation where my parent was my parent. They weren't really my friend.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really the case now with the millennial parents and the Gen X parents. And I think some of it does have to do with the pandemic. They were home with them. You were sitting across from them when you're both working and they're in school. And they began to rely on you and became, they're part of the decision making of a family. The children are. And that used to never be the case. So I think also we have to think about it from a perspective that the student really values the parent's perspective too. And if we are ignoring their parent, what does that say to the student as well?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a two-sided coin that we need to recognize parents in their position, but I think it really matters to students that we are recognizing their parents too.
What is it about typical college videos that make them so forgettable? If you ask me, it's that the word storytelling has been thrown around so much that we've watered down its meaning to where people think just about anything is a story when it's not. The default approach is like, hi, I'm Sarah, and here's all the reasons I like this program. And then they'll put a dramatic song underneath, and now it's a story, right? Wrong. And it's this misunderstanding of what storytelling is and how to apply that to a marketing context that causes college after college to fall victim to churning out videos that may be clear but aren't compelling. When you work with Unveiled on a video storytelling subscription or a one-off video project, we're going to challenge that default approach. We'll push you to think beyond what someone is saying and focus on why it matters, what it reveals about them, and how it makes the viewer feel. Because the difference between a boring video and a story, I hate to break it to you, is not a drone shot, and it's not an inspiring song. The most effective videos don't just explain something, they create connection, and connection helps differentiate your school from all the others. So take the next step at unveiled.tv and book a call with me. I'd love to hear what you're working on. Okay, let's get back to the show. So let's talk about how we communicate to parents with parent pages on websites. So what are the major problems with a lot of parent pages that you're seeing?
I think there's, number one, I'm just happy when a website has a parent page. And I'm going to say parent page and parent communication throughout this, but that's one of the actually key things that I think are important here to say is that it's not just parents, right? It's parents, family members, supporters. So one of the things that's really great to do is to diversify how you are talking about these people who are supporting the student, because it's not always a parent. We have more multi-generational families today than we've ever had. So we need to think about, it might be a grandparent that's raising that student. It might be someone else. But for brevity today, I'll say parent communication. But I think it's not just navigation. It's not just design. The number one overall, I think, problem with parent family pages is that they're just really emotionally flat.
Yeah.
They provide information, but they provide no human connection. That's by far and away, I think, the greatest challenge I think that institutions have, because it means you really have to invest in parent communication to develop that. But it's also what makes your pages the best. And I think, good storytelling understands the human stakes, right? A good story knows what someone wants, what their challenges is or their fears are, and then they try to resolve it. And parent pages usually do not do that.
Yeah.
A lot of them answer, where's the link to this office? But they don't answer, can I trust you with my student?
Yeah.
So they're informationally present, but emotionally absent in a lot of situations.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction too, because it seems like what you're saying is you really have to have a whole separate language for the parents and a whole separate design flow that sort of translates your content into, it's just that one parent pillar that's reading this. I had a vendor, I get these, and I'm sure you do too, I get these sales emails all the time from different vendors. And there was one recently that I was like, okay, I'm listening. It was one that I was like, okay, that might actually be kind of relevant for me. So I took the bait and I said, can you send me more info? Real guarded, just like, please send me more info. And they just sent me a link to their website. And I'm like, come on.
I lost you. Right?
Because I go to their website, it's all flashy. There's like all these like the automatic videos and stuff that scroll, and it's like doing all this. So you scrolling and things are animated and moving around. I'm like, I just trying to figure out what you do. Like, I kind of know what you do, obviously, because I was like somewhat interested.
So
but like,
often, right? You get to one of those pages and you're like, what do you even do? Or the language is so vague that you have to go to an about page,
Yeah, it was really vague language about how they help like video production studios or something like that. And I'm like, okay, but do you get like, are you for the Hollywood studios or are you for the small crew, marketing studios? Yeah. And I had to figure that out on my own. And eventually I assume it's for these Hollywood studios and they just, they emailed the wrong person. But that might not even be true. And they lost me anyway. I was like, see ya.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing I see across the board too with these pages. I have a kind of a list of problems, right? I think that there's always some problems that show up. A lot of them are like a filing cabinet of links, right? It's like, here's the financial aid link, the housing link, the FERPA link, the family weekend link, but they don't acknowledge, why that parent actually might be there. Maybe they're fearful of something. There's a financial anxiety. They have grief. There's grief that comes along with letting your student, go to college. And the parents aren't landing on those pages as just like neutral information consumers. They are typically arriving with a purpose and a feeling. And so you have to be able to be willing to say, okay, we need to think about that and get them to the place that they maybe need to go. But we don't need a link farm, and that's the thing I see a lot is to the institution that might feel comprehensive. Like, here, look at all this information I'm giving to you. But to a family, especially someone who's anxious or in a first generation family who's unfamiliar with higher ed, it can feel like, being handed a map and no like dot on it where you are.
Right.
And so some pages, I think, feel like the university took every link it didn't know what to do with, and it's just like swept into a pile. And it's like, here, family, this is for you.
Yeah, it's like, we're trying to be helpful. So we've just gathered all the links and we put them into one, 16 by 9 block here for you.
Exactly.
Which is like, okay, that's a step in the right direction. But
But, the other thing too, I think, is the links certainly are a common, I think, problem that I see across the board. But I think the other is too, just the location of the page. They can be hard to find. I recently did an audit of about 40 different parent and family pages, and some of them I had to dig for. And I think it's because, in web design, there is a tendency, and I've been through some web redesigns before, I think there's a tendency internally to that you organize information by offices, right? By how higher ed is organized or hierarchy. So internally you think, okay, there's financial aid and registrar and housing and student accounts and all of these things. But a parent doesn't really think in that way. And so there's some family and parent pages I found under, student life. But student life is kind of geared towards a current parent. It's not geared toward a prospective student. There are times where I found a parent and family page in the president's office because the person who manages it lives there, right? Like, that's where that person is. Well, to them, that makes sense internally. But if I'm a parent looking for information about my incoming student, I'm not going to go to the president's office section of your website to find it, right? So we need to think a little bit more about, too, what is the instinct of a parent if you're new to higher ed or you're just getting on the website for the first time for this to be. Because if it takes, 6 clicks and, a spiritual journey to get there, they're not going to do it. So we need to think about placement as well, because I think that has been an issue as I was going through and auditing these pages myself.
Yeah. So then let's talk about what does good look like. What are some actual points that schools should be zeroing in on and trying to optimize for?
I think there's a couple of things. A good parent page it's findable, it's emotionally intelligent, it's action oriented, and I would say it's really built around the family's questions, the questions that they're most likely to have. It shouldn't just be a landing place to then move them to the right department. It should be a place where they feel seen and they feel respected. Good doesn't mean sentimental, and I think that that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition that's, is not often thought about, is that, nobody needs a sonnet about like the bursar's office, but good needs to recognize like the human stakes though. They do need to recognize where families are right now and whether this is a place that, they can trust with someone that they love. So findable is definitely one that I've already mentioned, and they're really good pages kind of translate the institution into family language. I think we use a lot of jargon in higher ed, and we have some weird office names that often make no sense in higher education. And so translating those are incredibly important.
I mean, I've been like in the higher ed industry now for 5 years, and I honestly hate to admit it, I still couldn't tell you what a registrar is.
Or a bursar. I know those are two of the ones that I think confuse a ton of families. I remember there was an institution I was at, and they had a center for academic and professional enrichment, and we called it CAPE internally, which was fun. And like once you were internal, you knew what it was. It was really career development. Like but study abroad was also there. Like you wouldn't ever think that's where I'm going to go to find out about having study abroad experiences. Right. And so sometimes there are, it's just this lingo that we have, right? And families are not usually trying to understand your administrative structure. They're just trying to understand, get an answer to a question that they might have. I've mentioned that the biggest problem is emotional intelligence, acknowledging that they may be proud and terrified at the exact same time. And they may want their student to grow, but also be scared of letting them go. And so being able to kind of coach them through the process, I think is really important. It really respects that this is where you are as a parent. But I think what's also great about pages like this is for those institutions out there that are afraid that if providing more information to the parent is going to make them too engaged, I would say it can do the opposite if you do it in the right way. I think if you create a page that shows the parents how they can support their student and encourage independence, then you're actually doing yourself a favor. And I think that those are some things that you could write about. I've seen, there's a couple of good ones out there. And one of them I remember has a blog about parents, and they write about these emotional concerns. How do you support your student when you're far away? Or if you're in an international family from abroad, how can you support your student without taking over, And if you're providing that content to them, it's really going to help you in the long run. It helps you clarify what that family role should be without just assuming they're going to be kind of taking over as a parent. And really, they just create really good connection. I think, providing not just a directory, but, newsletters. If you have portals, it's a great place to have that. Webinars. I think parents really enjoy webinars. I just don't think that they're done as often as they probably should be. Giving them volunteer opportunities. Put that care into places that can really benefit you as an institution.
Yeah.
Like parent and family councils, volunteer opportunities. Allow them to share their story of their student, because that can help you in enrollment. And storytelling is, if their student has had a really great experience, then you can use this page as a way to siphon those great stories out.
That's a really interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. Yeah, like give the parents an opportunity to talk about their kid in a way that the kid isn't going to talk about themselves in that way.
Right. And a lot of parents want to hear from other parents. I think one interesting thing about generationally, particularly with millennials, because, for me, I remember the time of not having the internet, right? And then having the internet. And now I have an iPhone and I use ChatGPT every day, right? So we're kind of the last generation of that no tech, group of parents. But we're Googlers, right? Like, it's a verb for us. We're like, if my child is sick, like I am going to all kinds of things to see like what could it possibly be and why. And I think that it's really important to think about, our parents are out there and they're searching for us. So that means like they're out there looking on Reddit for threads too. Like I search on Reddit for things. They're out there Googling your name. They're going to look for reviews. They're going to talk to other parents, at school pickup about you. And I think it's important then to think that, these parents care what other people say, right? We put a lot of stock in the experiences other people have had, and we value that. And because of that, it would behoove any institution to think about parents as a way to talk to incoming parents. Get a parent council together and have one of their things be that they go out there and they call parents of families who are concerned about the finances or the return on investment of your institution, right?
Yeah.
Put them to work, use that energy for good, because I think parents are always going to want to hear the honest truth from another parent or someone who's been through that experience before.
Yeah, you mentioned Reddit, and that just has me thinking now, like, I wonder what the value would be of a parent subreddit for the school where parents can chat with each other and ask questions and other parents can answer the questions. That would, relieve some burden off the school, the staff and stuff.
Parent AMA, right? Ask me anything.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and honestly, Facebook groups for parents. Now, I understand what I'm saying here. I have been one of those people who have had to be in a Facebook group and monitor and do those kinds of things before. So before anybody listening is like panics over saying you need to have a parent Facebook group, that's not necessarily what I'm saying. But if you are a small school and you have the ability and you have the staff that are invested in parent communication and in the parent experience, they love to have conversations and get to know each other because it makes them feel included. And I think that's really ultimately what all of us want to be, right? We just want to be included. We just want to feel seen and heard. And sometimes those spaces are a great place to do that, giving them a place to be able to connect with one another.
Yeah, when I go to find a community or to like ask a question about a product or something, I default to Facebook. I honestly, like, now that I think about it, I don't really, I go to Reddit for if I'm like, I want to know the real scoop on something, like what people think. But if I'm going to like, we have a pool and, you know, you have to deal with pool
Right.
chemistry. And so I'm in the pool chemistry, whatever it's called, Facebook group, and you can like post a picture of your water and people be like, oh, add this, add that. Like, you know,
Yeah.
that's where I go for that kind of stuff. Or for like, we were having trouble with Riverside earlier in this conversation. So I, you know, in the third time that it cut out, while we were waiting for you to come back on, I went right to the Riverside Facebook group and was like, what is going on? I posted a screenshot of the error message that it kept giving us.
I'm a former Slate captain, and so, you know, a lot of institutions use Slate, and I know if they are a Slate user, there's a Facebook page for us as Slate users, and I can't tell you how many times something happens and I get in there and I'm like, is anybody else having this issue? Or Slack, you know, Slack is a great option too, and getting in there and asking people. I mean, if I go back right now, I am a user of Facebook in that I just scroll. I'm a watcher. Like, I don't
Me too.
post. But if you go back to my page, I bet if you went through the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 actual posts that I made, they were all asking for recommendations or what people think about something, because that's where we go as parents. I mean, I remember, this obviously dates me a little bit if I haven't already dated myself in this podcast today, but
It's okay. You're younger than me, so you're good.
I remember when Facebook, you know, was only for college kids. You had to have like a college account to go get on Facebook. And that's how it was originated, right? Was for you to connect with other college students. Like, that was the intent, and was to talk to and communicate. So I've kept it ever since then, but now we just use it in a different way. And so I think this generation is used to, because we were kind of the first ones in Facebook. And I think it, you know, obviously teens and stuff do still use it, I think, in different ways. But I think right now it's a parent place for sure.
Yeah, I would say we probably have another 5, maybe 10, I don't know, 5, maybe 10 years where I'm just thinking, like, you know, if the current generation of parents that have kids our kids' age are continuing to ride that, like, defaulting to Facebook for information or for responses from their community or from other community strangers, whatever, that might still be irrelevant. You know, we might be the millennial college, you know, generation of college parents. Facebook might still be relevant, but I feel like it's a ticking clock.
It is.
Where it's going to be, I don't know, Snapchat or something.
I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but we might as well utilize it while we can.
So thinking about a director of enrollment marketing, say that, listening to this, who's inspired to overhaul their parent page, what would be the first 3 pieces of content that you would advise they create specifically for parents to populate that page? Because what we've said already is that you don't want to just have it be a link farm. So what would you curate for them as your top 3 priority?
I think start with the highest value content that families needs most. And so for me, if I'm taking that stance, the first thing I would do is a start here, like a guide for prospective students and admitted families. One of the problems I think that I didn't mention earlier that I do think is a problem is that sometimes family and parent pages are only made for one segment of parents and families. There's not enough kind of equity across the board, not only in what stage they're in, but the type of family that might be coming through the door. So having a start here guide for prospective and admitted families is really important. You know, it's the front door. It should be written for the family who's trying to kind of orient themselves, find out what matters first, you know, cost, financial aid, visit information, deadlines, student support, mental and emotional health, safety and well-being, things about housings, outcomes, and, you know, how to contact admissions, but also what to expect next. You know, I think for me, a lot of my anxiety comes from the fear of the unknown. Like, what do I need to do next? What's coming my way that I don't know about? And I don't want a scavenger hunt on your website. I just need a front door. So, like, we may not know where you're starting, but start here. The second thing I would say would be like a what families worry about most hub or section, where I'm going to address the concerns that colleges are maybe sometimes even afraid to talk about or are intentionally avoiding because they might feel a little too emotional. So, can we afford this? Will my student be safe? What if my student struggles academically or emotionally? Will there be someone there to notice if my student is struggling? What outcomes can I expect? What happens after deposit? You know, I would build directly around the questions and the worries that families actually carry, I think sometimes you might think we don't want to feed into their anxiety. No, but you don't want to dress up anxiety or assume it's something that doesn't exist, because it does. Like I said, that's what's going to send those students or those parents to Google and Reddit and parent Facebook pages.
Right.
You want to keep them there. So that's kind of a second section I would have. And then the third is, like I said, give the parents, use that energy of their interest in their student and teach them how to support your student without taking over, right? Essentially. And I think that will honor student autonomy, but also honor the family involvement at the same time. It's how to support your student during the college search. Questions. I used to do kind of a BuzzFeed style with my parent communication. So 7 questions to ask after your campus visit. Here's a side-by-side of what students need to handle and how you can support them during that process.
Oh, that's good.
Right? How do I talk about money with my students? That is such a hard thing that we rarely address, which is how do you talk to your kids about how much money you actually have to spend for them to go to college? When do you encourage, self-advocacy? So maybe some ways you can give them is say, hey, when you're ready to set up a campus visit, have them call. Have them pick up the phone and actually call and set it up, or get online and fill out the form themselves.
Yeah.
So I think this is where colleges can kind of stop acting like the only option is helicopter parenting or silence. There is a middle ground there. And it's just showing them how what does appropriate support look like? And also from the college side, it can say, we want your student to grow and we want you to be involved in that. And I think that parents would really appreciate that.
Perfect. That's great. So I want to talk through some examples. You sent me some examples of good parent pages. I'm pulling these up right now on my internet. So we've got University of Washington, University of Texas, Hamilton, and Wake Forest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
shout out to all the good schools there.
Yeah. So what is making these stand out? Let's talk about University of Washington. I've got their page open right now. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I really liked about Washington is they recognize that families are just not one big audience blob, right? They have a stronger sense of segmentation than I think a lot of other institutions have. So they have first-year families, transfer families, first-gen families, out-of-state families, international families, right? And they recognize that all of these might need different kinds of clarity, right? A family sending a student across the country or internationally might need a different reassurance than someone who's, commuting from nearby. Or a first-gen family might need a little bit more explanation about processes and a change of language. I really like that institutions help families have better conversations with their students too. And I think that's what I also recognize about that. I love resources that help parents talk with their student, because otherwise, we know what happens with kids. We're like, hey, how's school today? And they're like, fine. And then that's just it, right? They are giving them some opportunities to have conversations with their students, and here's what you can do. And that's what I really liked about Washington.
All right. Awesome. All right. University of Texas. Tell us about that one.
Yeah. UT Austin is a good example of big institutions really need a very strong parent front door. I think the bigger the institutions, sometimes the more important that orientation becomes, because families might feel like they're really overwhelmed. Sometimes big institutions, it can feel like a city and not a campus. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of offices. There's a lot of processes and acronyms. And so the parent page really needs to reduce overwhelm. And I feel like that's what UT Austin's does pretty well. They need confidence that there's a path through, right? At a big university, just contact the right office is not a good strategy. The larger the institution, the more important it is to translate this very complex environment into very simple, easy to understand things that gives them confidence. And I think that's what UT Austin does really well. The other thing too is that they invest in a parent and family office. And I think that there's something to say for institutions like them that are big, that recognize that, hey, we've got a lot of parents of these students out there, and we're going to put the necessary resources behind it to make sure that they're spoken to and part of our community just like anybody else is.
Yeah, I love that. They do a great job of these segments of parents. So just for people who are just listening, there's a whole section with a bunch of different blocks. Basically what kind of parent are you? For prospective families, for incoming freshman families, for transfer families, undergraduate families. So that's great. And then in the contact us area, you can see there's a picture of on the big screen at the football game, it says Texas Parents Association.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have resources behind it, which is
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, this is a great example. And if I were a parent, I would be like, okay, cool. This is helping me start someplace and giving me a kind of a guided choose your own adventure kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to feel a part of something that's so big sometimes. And I think that when you are in a big institution, I think it's really important to make sure that you're recognizing that and still making them, feel part of the overall community of your institution.
Yeah. Let's talk about Hamilton.
Yeah, I pulled Hamilton because, I think it's important to see what do small schools do and what does it look like for them. And I think the opportunity for smaller schools is just a little different because they can make family communication feel very personal and specific and very warm because they have that advantage. They shouldn't try to sound like the large publics. Their advantage is intimacy, right?
Right.
So their parent pages should feel like someone knows the families there. I think the risk sometimes for small colleges is that sometimes they can assume like the warmth of the campus is just automatically going to come through. Like, because we all talk about community. I was at a liberal arts college for a long time. Like, oh, it's, the best thing about here is community. And we just assume that they feel that. But the website has to kind of carry that kind of warmth that, a parent may not necessarily be there in person to feel. So it's kind of like, the first handshake. It's not a directory. And I felt a warmth from Hamilton that I thought, really resembled what a small college should look like from a parent perspective.
And they've got like a angel cam here on there. And it's like a view of like the quad or something like that.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. They have I think they have done some things really well that are very unique to what a small college can do, right? And I think that's the most important aspect of them in particular in small colleges is that they have an advantage in that way that others don't.
Yeah, that's great. And I like that they have important dates right at the top there.
Very bold, right?
Yeah, I mean, if that's not the one thing you got to have on your parent
Listen,
page,
if something's not on my Google Calendar, it doesn't exist, right? So I think that that's great for parents as soon as they get on there to know some of the really big, important things that are coming up.
And then last, we have Wake Forest.
Yeah. Wake Forest, I think, is really strong because I'm going to say this and it might sound weird, but the family experience just feels like really alive. It's just not a static landing page. I think that they connect families to ongoing communication and deadlines and events and support. It has multiple options, I think. I also like when family pages help families know who to contact. And I know that sounds really basic, but I think what's really important is not just saying, oh, here's financial aid. What's important to parents often is, here's the financial aid office. Here are the things you can call them about. Here's this office. Here are the things you can call them about. Because to your point earlier, what does a bursar do? What does a registrar do? We need to have moments of where we understand what those are. So they really kind of have some great ways to reach out to different areas of their institution and kind of show parents where to go. And I think that, it kind of shows that it can be a hub. Like it feels like a hub, Wake Forest does. It's not just like a hallway or, like you said, a link farm to other places on campus.
Yeah, they've got like the parent and family events right front and center. That's like, okay, this is the thing. It says May 15th through 17th, commencement, October 2nd through 4th, family weekend. And it's got a little countdown thing, like family weekend begins in 120 days. Right. Which is cute. I don't know.
Yeah, it just like feels alive. Like there's stuff moving around and there's the countdowns. And I think that's what was interesting to me that I hadn't seen in some other places.
And you can sign up for family communications. I love that too, which is another question that I have. And I made a note to ask you about it. So I'll ask you about it right now, which is, how do you suggest schools get the parent information proactively, the contact information, in order to communicate proactively with them? It's
one of the biggest questions I get, honestly. And it's sometimes one of the reasons or the excuses I think I get of why they're not doing parent and family communication is they're like, oh, well, I mean, we don't get it till the admit stage. So, we're not going to do it. There's plenty of proactive ways I think you can go about it. I think if there's any form that a student can fill out, there needs to be an option to add a parent. Whether that's your campus visit, whether that's a card that you're having them write or a virtual tablet that you're having them do at a college fair or, a campus visit when they're signing up for a campus visit. There's something that I think a lot of institutions don't think about, which is ask the student. Like, just ask the student.
Yeah.
And I have written, lots of communication flows that start as early as the freshman year of high school, right? And having freshman and sophomore and junior communication leading up to the senior year. And I think there's this misunderstanding that, well, a student's not going to share that information, or we've asked and they don't tell us. If you just tell the student why you're wanting that parent information, it's really amazing the increase that you're going to have in inquiries of parents. Because, I think the initial question is, why do you want my parent information? Like, that's a bit sketch, right? That's sketchy.
Sus.
That's sus. And so if you just say, like, hey, we are super excited to get to know you. We would love to talk to your parent about things like billing and financial aid, so we don't have to bother you with it. Like,
perfect.
Right?
I wouldn't want to deal with that anyways.
I'm a parent. I really don't want to deal with it, but I also know that I have to deal with it. So I think if you provide a reason why, I actually literally made that change myself at one of my institutions, and we saw a ton of students fill it out. I mean, it was incredible how many additional contacts that we got for parents. And we did that through the sophomore and through the junior years, asking for their parent information. And, there are, ed tech companies out there who are like, hey, we can match parent information with mailing addresses. So that's a real benefit, because you could go out there and say, okay, we may not have this parent information, but here's how we can get it. Another great thing, use your website, right? Like, if you have someone who lands on your page and you serve them like a popover RFI form, let them choose if they're a parent or a student, and then that will get them into your system. So, I mean, I think it's really, you're unlimited. Any touch point that they have with you, you should be asking for a parent information. Absolutely. The other thing too is go to your alumni base, because you're going to have a ton of alumni whose kids are going to be coming up in the next couple of years, and ask them to opt in. That's going to fulfill a ton of people. So, I mean, there's all kinds of, unique, creative ways, I think, that you could do that.
I love it. That's very practical and helpful. So you built an assessment tool to help people audit their own parent pages. So tell us about that.
Yeah. In enrollment, we have a tendency to obsess over the student, and as we should. Every, email, every campaign, every visit, everything is built around them. But I think the student isn't the only one reading those emails alone. We know those are being forwarded. We know that parents are on our websites. We are attempting to build, web pages, and hopefully there are institutions out there who are creating communication flows for parents. But I found that, just like today, a lot of questions that I get are, how do I talk to them differently? What is it about parents that I need to be saying that I'm not? And so I built a parent and family communication analyst. It's free. It lives on my website. It's AI powered, and it just kind of gives like a piece of information to help you better judge if the communication that you're writing is appropriate for your audience. And to be clear, this is the audience most institutions, treat as an afterthought. And so sometimes these institutions are copying the student version and sending it to the parent. Well, that might not be the best way to go about it. So what I've done is it can actually take a URL. So you can pop in a URL and it will analyze that web page. Or if you have content like an email or text messages, you can actually copy and paste your email directly into the analyst. And then it reads the communication the way a parent would, and it analyzes it in that way. You get kind of a tiered review. So there's like 4 tiers. It's not just like a label slapped on. It will actually, rate each of them on a 1 to 5 scale. And it will give you a real description of your content about, here is what we think works. Here are some gaps. And, I think it's going to be something that if you're new to parent communication, it can be a real guide. A lot of people say I tend to give away the farm, but I'm like, this is what makes all of us better in higher ed, is things like this. And I love to share. And so since I can't just have me everywhere, I thought this was the next best thing.
I appreciate that. So what's the URL?
Yeah, so you can go straight to square1ky.com, SQUAREONEKY.com. It'll be on the homepage. It's free. Like I said, run your emails through it before your next, campaign goes out. Throw in some URLs of your parent pages. Worst case, you confirm you're doing great. Best case, you catch something that, maybe was costing you and you didn't know it and you can fix it. So
that's awesome. So when I go take a sample into the pool store, they have people's pool chemical tests that got 100% and they have it on the wall.
I need to do that. That's a great idea.
That should be something to aspire to.
I would love for the people who use this to honestly contact me. Let me know if it really has been, sometimes we put these things out in the ether, these white papers, and I have a first gen comms kind of like workbook essentially on my website as well. And I love hearing feedback. So if you use this and it's beneficial, I would love to hear about it. And if you get 100%, definitely let me know too, because you're killing it. But, my hope is, and I intentionally wrote it to not necessarily say, here are all the things you're doing wrong, but to say, here are the ways in which you can improve. And I think it may sound like it's similar, but it will definitely tell you where you're doing things really, really great as well. And I think this is going to make parents feel a little bit better and not so invasive in their students' lives. We want to make them feel like they're really part of this experience too. And so I hope this will help people write better for them.
Well, speaking of that, tell us about Square One Consulting in general, and who do you work with? How do you help them?
Yeah. So, I always say I help colleges communicate more clearly and speak more human. I kind of help with any audience. I really sit primarily at the intersection of enrollment marketing and, a Marcom office, but I do parent and family engagements. I also say I do strategy to Slate. So I mentioned I was a Slate captain in my previous life in higher ed. So I work with a lot of institutions to create a strategy and student journey mapping, and then develop their content for them and put it in their Slate instance and deploy it. And so I tend to work with a lot of small and mid-sized colleges that really need that assistance. They may not have the resources in-house to do it themselves. My job is to become kind of part of a team. And I think that's the beauty of being able to be a consultant, is that we have the ability to not only choose our partners, but really embed ourselves in a way that we can't in other ways. So I audit parent and family pages, I build enrollment communication flows, build out Slate journeys and portals, do yield and melt campaigns. Pretty much anything that falls into the enrollment marketing area is something that I'm happy to work on with any institution. And, my goal is that we keep the audience front and center. And I do a lot of data review too. So one of my most important things is that you got to know your audience. And sometimes your audience is not necessarily those that you're reading about in white papers. So I deploy a lot of audience surveys for my partners. And that way you can learn about who your actual parents and students are that might be very regional to you, and how they differ from maybe, grand data that comes from across the United States. So we build that out and then kind of look at your audience and make sure that we're communicating with them in the way that they need it to make them act and hopefully enroll at your institution.
I love it. That sounds great. I can already think of one school I want to send this episode to based on everything you've just said. So, well, thanks so much for coming on the show and bearing with the tech issues. So, it happens.
It does.
So.
Thanks for keeping me around.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give you two things before you go. Number one, reminder to sign up for the Higher Ed Storytellers Digest. It's my free weekly newsletter for Marcom leaders where we talk about all things content creation and strategy in higher ed. Subscribe at unveiled.tv/newsletter. Number two, follow me on LinkedIn. If you're searching for me, my name is John Azzoni, and it's spelled Johnazoni. All right, I'll catch you on the next episode, and in the meantime, I'll see you in your inbox. Okay, bye.